Hi, in this video we're going to be exploring the text box, one of the more commonly used common Windows Forms controls. And I have a project open here with an empty form and my toolbox docked and my properties window docked. And here's the text box. We can add the text box in a couple of different ways. One is we can drag it from the toolbox where we'd like to have it, and we'll get a default size text box. The other thing that we can do is simply double click the text box control and it will be added to our form in the upper left hand corner in the first available space. And so let's see what we can do with the text box and explore this a little bit. So we can drag it around, position it as we like. You can resize the text box horizontally. We'll see about how to resize it vertically. There's a little bit more to that. And then one of the most commonly used properties shows up right here under the text box tasks. If we hit the little flyout arrow on the control, we can make it into a multi-line text box. So any text that you place there that has a carriage return line feed break in it will show on a second, third, fourth line, depending on how many line breaks that you have. Okay, let's take a look at some of the more commonly used and important properties of the text box. So the way that we make sure that our properties window is displaying the text box rather than form, note that it's showing the form here. Simply select the text box, and the properties window is context sensitive, so it goes ahead and switches over to the text box properties. Move the talking head out of the way here momentarily. Probably the two most important things that we'll use most commonly is the text, which is anything that we put in the property for the text box so that it displays that by default. So we can set it up for default text even before any of our code has executed. If I just type a message, "Hi there," it appears in the text box. And so this is what it looks like at design time. Let's go ahead and hit the start button. There's really no code behind this right now, so it's not a very interesting program. But let's see what that design time change does at runtime. So here's the text box running, and it starts out with that default text, "Hi there." And that can, of course, be edited out because the text is enabled. And let's end the run here. Okay, aside from the actual text property of the control, probably the most important thing that we'll be dealing with is the name of the text box. And by default, all of our controls are labeled by the control type and what number they are. So this is our first text box, so it comes up as text box 1. And for the most part, we want to subscribe to best practice, which says don't leave the default name there. We'll be seeing in additional future videos what some of the naming conventions are. Those vary from shop to shop. Every IT shop tends to have its own standards. Real common one is to preface the text box control or whatever the control is with a certain preface of what the control is. So TXT is a common one for text boxes, and if this was a text box that was going to ask you to put people's names in it, we might call it text name, something meaningful like that. Okay, rather than text box 1, text box 2, text box 3, you can see in an application that has several text boxes on the form at a time, that could be pretty confusing. Okay, so we can change the name thusly, and then anywhere we refer to it in the code or the properties of this particular text box will be working with TXT name. This has now become the text name box. Okay, all right, so let's see how we interact with the text box. And the kind of surprising thing is when you're interacting with the text box, most of what you are going to be coding are not the events of the text box, but actually the events of other things that are working with the text box. So let's go ahead and drag a button out here. And if I double click that button, I will get the click event in the text editor or the code editor, and let's change it so text name equals dot text equals the string John, my name. Okay, so what we're doing here, that button is actually going to put something into the text box. When we click the button, so the button click event fires, the text name is now the name of our control, and the text property of that control is going to be set to John. So let's go ahead and see how that works when we run it. Okay, so we've got our default text which says hi there, and now if we come over and click on the button, that code fires and that text is replaced with John. So we can put things into a text box. We can also get things out of a text box. So for example, let's add another text box, and we'll copy the text from one text box into another. Okay, so let's come back to our Visual Basic form. So in our Solution Explorer, just double click the form, there we are. And let's add another text box. And let's change our button code. So if we double click on the button again, now instead of setting text name to John, let's take that other text box, which is going to simply be text box 1 now is the first text box. And you can see why it would be useful to take the time to name it properly so it would be clearer what we're doing. So the second text box now is now by default called text box 1, and we're going to set the text of the second text box to be equal to whatever txt name dot text happens to be. So when we click this button, which fires the click event, what's going to happen is that the text of text box 1 is going to be set to whatever was in text box name. So let's go ahead and see what this does. Okay, so by default, our text names has hi there in it. Text box 1 has nothing in it. We click the button and it gets copied. But we can come up here and say echo and hit button, and now echo is copied to text box 1. Okay. So we can, what we're showing there is that we can read the contents of the first text box and do something with it. In this case, we're doing something trivial, just adding it to the second text box as the text property. Okay, so we can read the text value, we can write the text value, so we have full in and out capabilities of that. Now you notice right now, I can type in either text box. The other common control attribute that you might be interested in is whether or not the control is enabled. So let's go back to our Solution Explorer, take a look at the GUI form again, and on our second text box, let's come down here, and where it says enabled, let's change that to false. And you don't see much change at design time, but at runtime, you'll see that the control is grayed out, and I can't click on it to change it. However, that doesn't mean I can't work with it programmatically. So when I hit the button, it still copies to the disabled text box. And that's kind of a nifty trick if you want to be able to change the contents of a text box but not allow the user to modify the contents of the text box, which will happen from time to time given the circumstances of various programming tasks. So there we are. All right, so let's wrap up by looking at one other important thing. And let me make a little room to slide that second button out of the way. We noticed that we could make this multi-line. You can do that here in the common text box tasks, you can also come into the properties, and if you look in the properties, you can change it to true down in the properties. Either one does exactly the same thing. So notice now multi-line is checked. It's since that property is used so very often, they made it a common task to kind of give you a little shortcut, because sometimes plowing through this long list of methods and properties on the control can take a little time. So that's a nice shortcut. Okay, so now we've made it multi-line, and so if we run it, we will see that we can indeed come in here. It says, "Hi there, how are you today? I am fine." And I'm hitting the return key, which is making a new line, and it's making it look empty. But if I use the up arrow, you can see all those lines of text are still in it. The text box itself is not physically tall enough to show me the multiple lines. That's a little bit of a problem. So let's see how we can address that. So now now that I've made it multi-line, notice that I've got additional handlebars in the middle. I can take and drag it to resize it. The other thing that I can do is, if I come over into my properties, if I wanted to control that very precisely, we can take a look at the size of the text box. And so let's say we wanted it to be exactly 60 pixels high. We can adjust it that way. So how about we made it 80 pixels. And now let's run that code. And the size is much larger, and you'll see that our multiple lines are displaying. So that's it for the text box. Plow through the tutorials and the programming example in the chapter, and you'll gain some more practice and insight there. As always, post your questions to the Q&A discussion, email, or give me a call if I can be of help to you. Thanks.